Book Club! Hey everyone, Dan here from One Man Book Club. I want to talk with you about Arcanum Unbounded. This is Brandon Sanderson's ultimate collection of Cosmere short stories. It's filled with novellas and short stories that are related to all of the different parts of the Cosmere. So, warning ahead of time, Arcanum Unbounded is strictly for fans of Cosmere who are experienced Cosmere followers and have read most of the stories inside the Cosmere. And I'll tell you which ones as I go through each of the stories that are included in Arcanum Unbounded. Okay, so book one of the compilation is The Emperor's Soul. Oh, what an amazing, amazing book this is. There's a reason it's won the Hugo Award for Best Fantasy Novella in 2013. Something that makes me laugh often is that Brandon Sanderson's novellas are like, the 200-ish pages, 150-page books. I guess as someone who normally writes like 1,000+ pages, that's normal. 150 pages is probably just what he writes like on a rainy afternoon, but for the rest of the world, I think you call it a novella, you call it a book. But anyway, it's part of Arcanum Unbounded. That's The Emperor's Soul is the first one here. There's a reason why The Emperor's Soul is one of Brandon's most decorated stories, regardless of length. As I keep discovering, rereading a good book that I haven't read in over a decade is just like rereading it again for the first time. I know the story, but getting immersed in the details and nuances is even better the second time. And I've read The Emperor's Soul now 2 or 3 times, and the last time I read it was a long time ago, like over 10 years ago. There's no content issues. The Emperor's Soul is a must-read for anyone who calls themselves a fan of fantasy. And everyone else too. It's just a really, really great story. So that's my little spiel on Emperor's Soul. I hope it's definitely worth your time and worth your read. The second story in Arcanum Unbounded is called The Hope of Elantris. Now, The Hope of Elantris is a true short story, just 50 or so pages, that gives an alternative view of what's happening to the Elantran children during the brutal climax scene in Elantris. It won't have any meaning for you until you've read Elantris, so that's got to come first. It's a very sweet story, even if it's a bit saccharine. It also doesn't add much by the way of new information. It's mostly just fun. The next story takes place on Scadrial. It's called The 11th Metal. It's like an actual prequel to Mistborn 1, The Final Empire. It was so fun to get a new Kelsier story, and I really, really loved it a lot. It also happens chronologically before The Final Empire, like I said, so I recommend you read it after you've finished the Mistborn trilogy, at least Era 1, because you might not appreciate some of the more spoilery elements of the 11th Metal. Allomancer Jack and the Pits of Elantia is the next story in Arcanum Unbounded. Now, this was a fun and clever short story featuring the larger-than-life personality that's featured in those newspaper clippings in between chapters of Mistborn Era 2 books. While it's written for fun, I don't recommend you read it until after you've read Mistborn Era 2, just for the most spoiler-free experience. Although I will say the things that you learn, they actually won't diminish the experience really at all, should you just want to read it first. So that's the Allomancer Jack story. And then the big one of the big ones you find in Arcanum Unbounded is Mistborn Secret History. This book is a novella. It's a couple hundred pages. It's a long novella. But holy cow, it's got a huge, gargantuan Mistborn Era 1 and Era 2 spoilers. So do not read Mistborn Secret History until after you've finished at least Bands of Mourning, which is part of Mistborn Era 2. So important that you don't ruin it for you by reading it until you've read Bands of Mourning. But here's a little bit about Mistborn Secret History. So it came out a full decade after The Final Empire. And when I read Mistborn Secret History first, back in 2016, I was overwhelmed with information, and I was very underwhelmed with the experience because I'd read the Mistborn the first time so long before. My memory of it and as well as at that time, my understanding of the Cosmere was not up to the task. I read it again a second time, just after just before, I should say, Rhythm of War was released. The second time through, holy cow. I mean, things absolutely just clicked into place. My eyes were open to a much bigger picture. Mistborn Secret History totally reframed my understanding of what is happening with the Cosmere. The implications of Secret History stretch across all Cosmere worlds. I recommend you read Secret History you read Secret History after you have had a thorough reread of Mistborn that is fresh in your mind. Maybe even plan on reading Secret History twice, just because there's that much stuff in it. Okay, that's the last of Scadrial. Now the next story is White Sand. Okay, let me admit something to you about White Sand. I am a little embarrassed to admit this to you, but I actually skip White Sand. It's the only Brandon Sanderson book that I haven't read. It's a graphic novel, and I'm not a fan of the format. I know others haven't been in love with the story either, and everything that's Cosmere relevant in White Sand you can get from the wikis. So I haven't read it. Am I wrong? I don't know. Changed my mind, but I haven't read it yet. Maybe that will be helpful for you and you deciding if you want to invest time in White Sand. And if I should read it, please tell me that I'm missing out. That leads, though, to my most favorite of all Sanderson short stories. It's called Shadows for Silence in the Forests of Hell. Oh my goodness, this short story is amazing. I love it so much. Brandon wrote it after being invited by George R.R. Martin to join one of his anthologies titled Dangerous Women. It's the only book we have from the planet Threnody, for now. Plus, it has the most awesome title of any book ever written. It's wonderfully and unexpectedly creepy. It's a whole novel's worth of fun packed into an 89-page novella. I'm telling you guys, Secrets for Silence in the Forest of Hell is a must read. Shadows for Silence in the Forest of Hell. I think I said Secrets. Anyway, must read. The next short story in here is called, in Arcanum Unbounded, is called Sixth of the Dust. Like I said, another short story. Before Tress came out, this story was chronologically the furthest down the timeline by quite a long while. It's all we have from the Andromenad system of the Cosmere, and it takes place on a planet that has no shard, but for some reason has a perpendicularity. It's also the home planet of some chickens we read about on Roshar. It's a very lovely story, definitely worth your time, and likely will have future Cosmere significance as well. The last novella in Arcanum Unbounded is Edgedancer. It's another thing, just I've said it a few times, that I love about Sanderson. He calls a 272-page book a novella, which is what Edgedancer is. Now, Edgedancer is packed full of spoilers for The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance. So you must read those two books from the Stormlight Archives first. Edgedancer tells more of the story of Lift, everyone's favorite girl, who was the focus of an interlude in Words of Radiance, but she became a significant player in both Oathbringer and Rhythm of War. She'll also be a key figure in the second half of Stormlight as well. So Edgedancer has some really great and important information setting up Lift. It sets the scene also for a couple other characters who are well known and have some significant events happen to them between Words of Radiance and Oathbringer. So anyway, it's an important part of the bigger story that should be read at least after Words of Radiance and before you read Oathbringer. On its own, Edgedancer is a perfectly entertaining and classically Brandon Sanderson story. Lift is an outstanding character who demands to be cheered for and has just literally miles of headroom and growth. She's funny and she's kind and she's troubled, and I can't wait to see what the future holds for her. And that is Arcanum Unbounded. The stories are divided by the worlds they represent, and each world is introduced with an essay by Chris of interesting stuff, interesting facts. Plus, you'll find new art. There's a star map of the Cosmere and a planetary. There's planetary charts for each of the planet systems or planetary systems that are talked about. Arcanum Unbounded is a must-read for serious fans of the Cosmere. Anyway, that's Arcanum Unbounded. Hope that was helpful. Happy reading, everyone.